Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. As we enter the last year of college football as we currently know it, we can now look ahead to see what the new scheduling format of the Big Ten is going to look like, as it was just announced here this past week, what it's going to look like when the Big Ten adds USC and UCLA, ultimately bringing the conference's total to 16 teams. Divisions will go away, as we all expected. The format is slightly different, though. Going to get into all of that today and talk a little bit just about the 16-team Big Ten and what that's going to look like for Purdue, with knowing the schedules in 24, 25, and just the challenges that will present moving forward from that. And then a quick note at the end, because on the basketball side, we've got scheduling to talk about too, because Purdue announced this week another really high-level game around Christmas time this year, actually on my birthday. So we're going to talk about that as well. Lots of scheduling talk here today. Always a fun thing to discuss. If you don't, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. I try to stay on top of as much as possible over there. It's going to be a big month for football recruiting. The countdown to kickoff is going slowly but surely, as I believe today is 83 days as I record this here on Sunday until Purdue gets going. Be sure to follow along on Twitter, though, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because I don't think we're going to have very many more off weeks between now and I would say the start of football season. But once that gets going, we're pretty booked until next April. So going to be a lot to talk about. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. But, just in general, when the Big Ten released its schedule, what was it, Wednesday or Thursday last week, it just reminded you that this season, the 2023 season, is going to be the last season of college football as we know it. At this time next year, at this time next summer, as we're preparing for the upcoming season, when you're reading your preview magazines, you get that Athlon, you get the Phil Steele, the Pick Six previews in the mail, and the conversation is going to be about a 12-team college football playoff. Just a radical change for the sport that, up until 1998 didn't have an actual championship game. Now it's a 12-team playoff. That's going to be a dramatic shift. And the unintended consequences of that, who knows? But it's going to make a major impact on the sport. You're going to be talking about Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC, and USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten. Lord knows what other conference realignment news could happen between now and then. But at the bare minimum, you're going to have the two biggest brands from the Big 12 now in the SEC, and you're going to arguably have the two biggest brands in the Pac-12 gone to the Big Ten in the first real coast-to-coast conference. College football is going to look dramatically different. For better, for worse, I think you all are well aware that this isn't exactly my favorite thing. But there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's already, it's going to happen. So we might as well just embrace it. But, this is the last year of college football as we know it. Because next year, you have a 16-team Big Ten, and you have really, from what is currently happening in the league, a pretty dramatic shift in how games are played and how the league is decided. As you are aware, and I assume so if you're listening to this, I assume this isn't the first you've heard of this, but with the 16-team Big Ten, divisions are going to go by the wayside. This is both the right move just logically and competitively. The Big Ten certainly had its struggles with divisional imbalance in this current iteration. I don't know that the leaders and legends were as bad competitively, but the makeup never made sense. And it was just a mess there. But, it would be really difficult to have 2 8-team divisions and still really feel like one whole conference. Sometimes it was even hard with 7-team divisions. You look at how long it was between games for Purdue and some Big Ten East teams, and it was weird. So now divisions are gone, and we're going with the flex protect model, as the Big Ten calls it. So essentially, every team will have between 0 and 3 protected rivalries, which will be played on an annual basis. I think there are 11 games in total that are protected. And I like this because, I personally had advocated on Twitter for the 3-6-6 model, where you'd have 3 protected opponents. The other 12 schools would be split in, 6 and 6. You'd play 6 one year, then the other 6 the following. I thought that was going to be the way to go just because it's logical, it's easy. But the one downside to that the flex protect model here avoids is that you don't have these forced rivalries on you. Like right now, in this new model, Iowa has 3 protected rivals. They've got Nebraska, they've got Wisconsin, they've got Minnesota. And that's perfect because those are legitimate rivalries. Those games should be played every year. Penn State has 0. Sorry, Land-Grant Trophy. It's not being played every year. Sorry, Old Brass Spittoon. It's not being played every year. That's okay. Not Spittoon. That would be Michigan State and Indiana, but that's not protected either. But Penn State, nonetheless, zero protected rivalries. And there's not a real natural game to protect. As you're probably aware, Purdue gets Indiana and Illinois every year. And I think that's great. Purdue's 2 trophy games that are in the league will be protected. Indiana was obviously, a must-keep, non-negotiable. Illinois, I'm glad it's kept. I think with how close geographically those 2 schools are, certainly for the next who knows how many years, really. But for the time being, you have the Brett Bielema, Ryan Walters tie into that game to make it interesting. I think that's a good game to keep protected. I like that. Because of this, though, you don't have the forced rivalries. I'd talked to some folks on Twitter. Who would Purdue's third be? Well, there's not a great answer there. And what you didn't really want is for Purdue to get stuck with, like a Michigan or Ohio State for competitive balance. But you really didn't want one of the California schools either because it's weird. It's awkward. It's forced. Nothing is forced now. And I really like that. The interesting part of this, though, is because of the way, the numbers work, you have to play at least one team back-to-back years to make this all work, unless you're Iowa, who has 3 protected games each year. So Purdue will get Northwestern in both 2024 and 2025, and then in 26 and 27, if this model stays the same, I presume, it'll be a different team. It won't be the same team that you play in both of the 2-year periods. So, it's confusing a little bit. I think once we get into practice, it's going to be a breeze. The team that you get stuck playing twice in that time period is, it is what it is. I think that's better than having a forced rivalry that you're kind of playing in perpetuity just for the sake of it. Is this advantageous for Purdue? Maybe. The Northwestern part, I think, is a legitimate advantage for 24 and 25. I don't know what Northwestern's, I don't know what the pulse is on that program because they have their own challenges. that existed long before the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness became a part of the sport. Now that players have the one-time transferability, which, really is as many times as they would like transferability, and they can profit off their name, image, and likeness, or just get paid, Northwestern's in a really tough spot there because it's almost impossible for them to take transfers. They can get a guy or two in per year maybe, but you can't see them, they can't possibly do what Purdue did and take 20 guys out of the portal in 1 year. They can lose as many guys as possible. Now, I don't know that that's been a big issue there, but they can lose as many guys as want to leave, but they can only add folks who can get into Northwestern academically. And with how credits transfer, I don't think Northwestern is going to bend too much for that. And with NIL, again, it's a school with some very, very wealthy alumni, but do they care about sports? All history indicates not exactly. I think it's a good thing to get Northwestern. They've been abysmal 3 of the last 4 seasons. Will that trend continue? I like Purdue's chances there. With Indiana and Illinois every year, right now Indiana is what it is. It's in a weird spot. They really went all in on Tom Allen after the 2020 season. Is that proving to be the wrong decision? Maybe. The last 2 years have not been good for them. How much does Indiana want to win in football? I think is kind of the real question there, because it's not like they've ever really thrown a ton of money at it. Whether that changes or not, I don't know. But that's your rival, and right now they're not in a great spot. That helps Purdue. And with Illinois, they are on the right path. They are doing some good things. Brett Bielema knows how to run a program. That's something that's very clear. There's a level of competency there that wasn't there in the last few coaching staffs at Illinois. Now he's got to replace his defensive coordinator. We'll see how big of a loss. It's certainly a loss. How well they replace him, I don't know. But that program's in the right spot. It's not Michigan. It's not Ohio State. It's not Penn State. It's not Southern Cal. So for Purdue, this is a pretty good gig. It could be worse. It could be a lot worse. But overall, I really like this. Credit to the Big Ten, because I did not have the utmost confidence in the Big Ten to put together something that really made sense. It's been kind of a comedy of errors for the Big Ten, dating back to Kevin Warren's handling of the 2020 football season. Not a lot has been great since then. This is great. I really like this. The one thing that is very apparent when you just look at this, and when you look at the future and look at the ramifications this has on every team in the league, the reality of this is that this is going to bring in a ton of money for every athletic department. I know there are some, holdups with the TV deal, but it's largely done. The schools are going to make a boatload of money off this every year. But from a competitive standpoint, it does not help the schools that are in Purdue's shoes, that are in Minnesota's shoes, that are in Maryland or Michigan State, or really anyone, but especially not the big 3 of Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. I got a text about as soon as this scheduling format came out, and we saw Purdue's opponents in 24 and 25, from a longtime listener of the show. And he pretty much said, Purdue's never making it back to the Big Ten championship game again. What they did last year, I don't know that they can do it again. And it's going to be a much more uphill battle than it used to be. That goes without saying. Without divisions, it's just going to be the top 2 teams in the league that go to the conference championship game every year. So whoever the 2 best records are, who knows what tiebreakers will be. Too early for that. But the two best records are going to go play in the conference title game. You've got to probably be 9-0 or 8-1 in Big Ten play to get there. Maybe you can, say a prayer in 7-2 with some weird tiebreakers and get it. But, 7-2 is going to be the absolute minimum. That's an uphill battle. Purdue lost 3 Big Ten games last year and still won the West. In 2 of those games, they were absolutely blown out and they won the West. You don't have the benefit that came with the Big Ten West. It was a lighter path. There's no doubt about that. I think you look at this league now and just the top is so potentially dangerous. You look at Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Southern Cal. All 4 of those schools look like they're in a spot right now that in a 12-team playoff, they're going to be perennial playoff contenders. Ohio State and Michigan have been there. Michigan's been there 2 years in a row. Ohio State's been there more years than not, I think. Penn State, under James Franklin, is doing really well. They're recruiting really well. They're just a half step behind Michigan and Ohio State. But in a 12-team playoff, you go 10-2 every year, you may be in. And USC with Lincoln Riley, Lincoln Riley's been in the playoff almost every year, everywhere he's been. He's a fantastic coach. So you look at that at the very top, and that's a really good top 4. You look at what Wisconsin has been, remarkably consistent, and they're taking swings, by paying Luke Fickell what they're paying him. They're taking a swing trying to get even better, trying to climb even higher on the college football ladder. Nebraska will throw money at that thing until they get it right. And they're going to throw money at it even if they die trying. They care like no other. Iowa, never an easy out under Kirk Ferentz. Chip Kelly out at UCLA. Great coach with a great recruiting base. The floor there with him should be fairly high. Fleck has Minnesota in a good spot. Bielema's getting Illinois there. The conference is going to be really good. And now you're going to be playing half of those good teams every single year. And that's going to be tough. That's going to be a really tough adjustment. That's going to have a pretty real impact on what Purdue's reality is. I was looking at past schedules when putting together this episode. Purdue last played Michigan in the regular season back in 2017. Brahms' 4th game at Purdue. It was hotter than all hell at Ross-Ade that day. Afternoon kickoff on Fox. Before that, Purdue hadn't played Michigan since 2012, when I think that was still Denard came into Ross-Ade and just embarrassed Purdue. From 2012 to 2023, Purdue and Michigan, I don't know where I got Illinois. Purdue and Michigan played each other in the regular season just once. Now you're going to play Michigan every other year. In 6 years at Purdue, Jeff Brom faced Penn State and Ohio State just twice each. That'll be 3 times now. And before 2018, it had been a few years since Purdue played Ohio State. 2015 maybe, 2014, 13 was a Ross-Ade game. This is a lot different. You're going to be playing these teams a lot more frequently. You're going to be seeing just a tougher level of competition over the course of your 9 conference games than you did before. Now, you'll get Rutgers more frequently. You'll get Maryland, Michigan State more frequently. But it's going to be tough. Mixing in USC as well every other year, UCLA, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. I've long been of the opinion that Purdue is doing itself no favors with how it schedules in the non-conference. And I think now you really need to take a look at what's scheduled in the future and be very careful with this. Let's look at next season. The 2024 season, alone, where Purdue has its first round of the expanded Big Ten schedule, where Purdue will play Penn State and USC. They'll go to Wisconsin, at Michigan State. This is not an easy conference schedule, but in the non-con, you have Notre Dame and you have at Oregon State. Now, Notre Dame is fun to have on the schedule. It's nostalgic for a lot of people. There's real passion from a lot of Purdue fans of hating Notre Dame. And Oregon State's already scheduled. It's a return game. I get it. Play it. Don't buy yourself out of all these games. But that's a really tough duo. Notre Dame's Notre Dame. And in case you're not aware, Oregon State just won 10 games last year. Jonathan Smith is an excellent coach out there. They're doing some really good things. And you're flying out to Oregon. That's not going to be a fun game to play. If you're walking into Big Ten play at 1-2, you're going to need a minor miracle to go bowling. Penn State, USC, at Wisconsin, history tells you those are going to be tough games. Purdue needs to be really careful with how it schedules. I look out at the future here. You've got a home and home with North Carolina, with Wake Forest, with Ole Miss, a couple of return games to Vandy and TCU. Tread lightly. Just tread lightly. Because the last thing you want to do is get into this where you've got a real treacherous Big Ten slate and you're 1-2 going into it. Or, God forbid, you're 0-3. But you get the point. You don't need to make this harder on yourself because the Big Ten's already done that for you. It's going to be plenty difficult. I think the upcoming year here, from really now until this time next year, is going to be really, really, really important for the future of the program and how it's going to fare in the first few years of this. And I'm really not that focused on what happens on the field this season. Obviously, you want some proof of concept. You want it to look like Ryan Walters. And I shouldn't say look like. You want it to absolutely be where there's some real proof of concept with Ryan Walters' defense, with Graham Harrell's offense. You want this to look good. But what's going to be really crucial here, with some proof of concept, is upgrading that talent level. If you want to be competitive in this conference, be in that top half race, you want to be in the top 8 of the 16-team Big Ten, you need to land a solid signing class here and really make some head waves in the high school recruiting world. It's been discussed here, Purdue's last few classes at the end of the Jeff Brom era were less than stellar. Were there good players in there? Absolutely. But were these classes that, history tells you will be leading you to 8-9 win seasons? No, not really. Obviously, you supplement that with the transfer portal. If you can land a good high school class here, the class of 24, that's great. And if you can get a guy or two who's going to be an instant impact guy, even better. But Purdue has to keep building through the portal as well. You have to be getting guys who are ready to come in and contribute. And you have to try to get to the point where, you don't go into the season. You're probably never going to go into the season feeling great about your two deep everywhere, especially in the transfer portal era where your guys can leave too. But you don't want there to be many more seasons like this where you're real worried, if you're Purdue right now, about linebacker. You're probably uncertain about corner. Offensive line, maybe, who's playing right tackle now? You don't really want there to be many more seasons where you're coming in with questions at your top 22. That's going to be really important. Ryan Walters absolutely understands the importance of talent acquisition in this sport. He's made it very clear. He's talked about, went on the radio and said, hey, our facilities are great. It's time to donate to the Alliance because we need to go get guys. He gets it. Now, getting it and going out and acquiring these guys, that's different. It's a lot harder to do. The first step is there. Walters gets it. Now he's got to go do it, and he's got to put together a roster that, really is built to compete, not necessarily with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Southern Cal, but with everyone else in the Big Ten. Getting that roster to the point where, you don't go into the season thinking that anyone besides those top four is a guaranteed loss, so to speak. That's going to be big. It's going to be hard to do, but it's going to be big. You have to combine high school recruiting with the portal, though. Both of those are going to be critical. You have to have high school recruiting. It's still the best way to build a strong roster. The portal is going to help you fill gaps, but it starts with high school. I think, to get to that point where you have special seasons, where if you're Purdue, a 12-team playoff, Lord only knows. If you look at the history of Purdue, 2003 and 2000 would be the only years where Purdue ever really had a prayer, unless you go back to the 60s. It's going to be hard. You would need a defense that you're winning games because of, not that you're winning games with, but a defense that's going out and if not pitching shutouts, coming damn close. And you need a quarterback who's a top 5 quarterback in the country. Probably something like Purdue had in Drew Brees and Kyle Orton, guys who, were Heisman contenders. Orton tapered off, but, someone like a Drew Brees. That's what it's going to take to get to that point, to get to a Big Ten championship point. It's going to be hard to do, but, hey, that's why Ryan Walters is getting paid $4 million a year. That's why he's got the assistant pool at what it is, pushing $6 million a year. It's going to be a whole new college football, and it's going to be fascinating to see how prepared Purdue is for that come next fall. I did want to touch on a little bit. Obviously, this has been a football-heavy episode, but while we're on the topic of scheduling, Purdue basketball has loaded up this non-conference schedule. My goodness. Now, I will note there's a bit of hypocrisy here. Two completely different sports. I think it's nonsensical for Purdue to have a really difficult non-conference schedule in football, because unless you are one of the, top 6, 7 teams that's in the mix for the college football playoff, strength of schedule means nothing. Obviously, in college basketball, it's a key part of your NCAA tournament resume. So there's some reason to do it in basketball. And Purdue has a loaded non-conference game. This week, Purdue announced that it will play Arizona on December 16th, just a few blocks from where we're recording this podcast right now. That game will be at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Interesting how they're doing it. It's still going to be the Indy Classic. It's still going to have a Ball State game beforehand, and then Purdue, Arizona in the main event, so to speak. Excellent game. Arizona, Tommy Lloyd's got a really good thing going there. They're like a preseason top 10, top 15 team. That's huge. I think, if you go back to last year after Purdue played Davidson there, and there were like 9,000 people in the stands, I'd said if Purdue doesn't get a real opponent, a high major appealing opponent in for next year, this Indianapolis thing might not work. I think it's going to work. If playing Arizona in December, the weekend before Christmas and all that, if that doesn't work, if that doesn't fill it up, then you're not going to. That's a big time matchup. That's one that's going to be really cool. Now, just to read off here what, we know of Purdue's non-conference. They've got 3 games in Maui. All of those teams that are out there are pretty good, if not excellent. Syracuse, who knows what they'll be, year 1 with a new coach. And then Chaminade is in it, of course. It's Maui. We don't know matchups yet, but that group out in Maui this year is unbelievable. Kansas is out there. Marquette is out there. Gonzaga there, maybe? I can't remember, but it's a really good crew. You've got the Gavitt game at home against Xavier. Alabama game up in Toronto. Can't forget about that with Zach Edey. Bye games against Corpus Christi, Texas Southern, Eastern Kentucky, and Jacksonville. So the interesting part, we know, I think this is what? This is 10 of the 11 non-conference games for Purdue that we know at this point. So, you're really just waiting on one more game that I would assume is going to be a bye game. I think 5 bye games, and if you're not familiar with that terminology, bye game meaning Purdue's paying someone to come play a low major that Purdue expects to beat. Fill out the season ticket package, give someone a payday, move on. I think Purdue's going to have one more of those. That would make sense, to have 6 pretty high level, if not really high level games, unless you draw Chaminade. That could be really big. This is a heck of a schedule. It's as strong as it gets. And I think it's clearly obvious that Purdue wants to battle test this team as much as possible. This is a season that, as I've discussed, for a lot of folks is going to come down entirely to what Purdue does in the NCAA tournament. And playing games like this, like Arizona, like Alabama, like these games out in Maui, those are teams that you would see in a second weekend of an NCAA tournament. And if it's really Final Four or bust, you better be ready for that. Going to be really interesting because Purdue could lose some of these games. And Purdue has been excellent in the non-conference. It's been back-to-back years where Purdue did not lose a non-conference game. So that's interesting. That's a whole different dimension. But, nonetheless, a very challenging non-conference for Purdue. And if they can't make this one work in Indianapolis, then it's time to abandon ship and give up on the plan altogether. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for spending some time with me. I am planning to be back here next week. If there's anything you'd like me to touch on, please reach out, Twitter @BoilersBeyond. I am all ears. We're getting to the point here where we're about a month out from when we'll really start getting into football preseason stuff. So, I don't want to dive too much into that yet, but would love to keep doing episodes, we'll have plenty to talk about with how much news happens. But if there's anything you want me to dive into, please do reach out with that. Be sure to follow over on the Twitter and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, take care, everyone, and I will talk to you then.